Welcome back to The Unseen Hand, your source for uncovering the truth behind the world's most mysterious and sinister events. Today, we'll take a trip down memory lane and revisit the infamous television show To Catch a Predator, an American reality television series that aired on NBC from 2004 to 2007. The show, hosted by Chris Hansen, featured hidden camera investigations exposing online sexual predators who were attempting to meet children for illicit purposes. Let's jump into our top 10 list of criminals featured on the show. Coming in at number 10, we have John Doe. No, we're not talking about an unidentified corpse. This man's real name is actually John Doe. When he arrived at the Sting house, he was carrying a bag filled with sex toys and alcohol, intending to meet a 13-year-old girl. After his arrest, John was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Upon his release, he was required to register as a sex offender. Today, he lives a life of relative obscurity, but his past still haunts him. At number 9, we have David Kay, a former rabbi who was caught trying to meet a 13-year-old boy for sex. In a shocking twist, Kay was not only a religious leader but also a counselor for troubled teens. He was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison and, upon his release, was placed on the sex offender registry. Kay now lives a quiet life, attempting to escape the shadow of his past. At number 8, we have Jeffrey Sokol, a 44-year-old man who drove over 100 miles to meet a 13-year-old girl. Sokol brought a marriage contract with him to the Sting house, hoping to convince the girl's parents to let them wed. After a tense confrontation with host Chris Hansen, Sokol was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 7 years in prison. He remains on the sex offender registry today, living a life of shame and regret. In the number 7 spot, we have Walter Babst, a former teacher who showed up to meet a 12-year-old girl for sex. Babst was sentenced to 6 years in prison and was subsequently fired from his teaching job. Upon his release, he was required to register as a sex offender. Babst now lives a life of isolation, his reputation forever tarnished by his heinous actions. At number 6, we have Stephen Buchanan, a former Marine who was caught attempting to meet a 14-year-old girl. Buchanan was charged and sentenced to 5 years in prison. After serving his time, he was dishonorably discharged from the Marine Corps and is now required to register as a sex offender. Today, Buchanan struggles to rebuild his life and move on from his dark past. Coming in at number 5 is Michael Gentile, a 64-year-old man who attempted to meet a 13-year-old girl for sex. Upon his arrest, authorities discovered child pornography on his computer. Gentile was sentenced to 10 years in prison and is currently serving his time. Once released, he will be required to register as a sex offender and remain under supervision for the rest of his life. Number 4 is John Kennelly, a man who appeared not once, but twice in the same episode. Kennelly was caught chatting with a decoy posing as a 14-year-old boy, and when he arrived at the Sting house, he was completely naked. He was arrested and released on bail, only to be caught again the next day, attempting to meet another underage boy. Kennelly was sentenced to probation and ordered to register as a sex offender. As of now, he remains a registered sex offender and has largely stayed out of the public eye. Number 3 is Assistant District Attorney Louis Conrad's case took a tragic turn when he took his own life as police approached his home to arrest him for soliciting sex from a decoy posing as a 13-year-old boy. The incident led to a lawsuit against NBC by Conrad's family, which was eventually settled out of court. This case raised questions about the ethics and methods of the show. Number 2 is Justin Smith was a school teacher who was caught trying to meet a 13-year-old girl for sex. His tearful confrontation with Chris Hansen was one of the show's most memorable moments. Smith was sentenced to 30 days in jail, 3 years probation, and required to register as a sex offender. He is currently listed as a registered sex offender. Number 1 is Brian Gosselin was a former police officer caught trying to meet a 14-year-old girl for sex. His confrontation with Chris Hansen was tense as Gosselin attempted to assert his innocence. He was later convicted of attempted second-degree sexual assault and risk of injury to a minor. Gosselin was sentenced to 10 years in prison, suspended after 5 years served, followed by 10 years of probation. Gosselin is now a registered sex offender. And that wraps up our deep dive into the top 10 criminals featured on To Catch a Predator. These cases not only shed light on the dark side of humanity, but also serve as a critical reminder to always be cautious and protect ourselves and our loved ones from online dangers. Though the show was criticized for some of unethical ways they exposed criminals, but ultimately they exposed criminals hiding in plain sight, who otherwise would have not been caught. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey with The Unseen Hand. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell to stay updated on our latest content. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, so feel free to join the conversation. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.